Hi everybody, welcome to Dynamo Sword Channel. I'm David, and today on Dynamo Sword Channel, I will be discussing my opinions on the production sword market. This video will be in regards to the differences between functional and non-functional swords, price tiers for functional swords, as well as share some advice to those interested in getting the best sword for their money. So, for those unfamiliar with the production sword market, you might be asking what a production sword is. A production sword is a sword that is mass produced by a forge or manufacturer and sold in production runs throughout the world. Production swords can be of any style or design, from a historically accurate sword to even swords of literature, film, and fantasy. They can be of various craftsmanship and of course cost, from cheaper display swords, more commonly known as wall hangers or sword-like objects, to highly detailed and crafted swords reaching up to $1,000 or more. Really, there is something for everyone in the production sword market. It just depends on what you want and how much you're willing to spend. But most importantly, it is important to understand what you're buying and who you're buying from, and hopefully I can help many of you with this video today. First, I think it's important to figure out what your interest is in a sword. Are you a collector who simply likes swords for their aesthetic appeal, or are you a martial artist who is looking to engage in traditional sword arts such as Genjutsu? Are you someone intrigued with military history and enjoying collecting weapons of the past? Or are you a little of each, someone who enjoys using their swords as well as appreciating both their historical significance as well as appeal in pop culture? Well, depending on where you fall in will depend on what sword is right for you. So let's look at the various types of swords available on the production market and see which type of enthusiasts they match. So the first type of sword we'll look at is collector grade swords. As mentioned before, these swords fit the category of display swords and come in various levels of finish, from the cheaper stamped and cast zinc alloy stainless steel swords to the more intricate and expensive ones made with silver and gold embellishment. Basically, if you're looking for a sword to hang on the wall and appreciate, these are the swords for you. It should be noted that there is a negative stigma towards these swords in the sword community. But really, if you have no intention of using a sword or swords in general, these are usually the best options, as they are made of materials that are better suited for decoration and also costuming and display. One thing to remember is that though stainless steel is a poor option for a functional sword, its rust-resistant properties do benefit display, as it is lower maintenance compared to high-carbon steel. Also, many fantasy swords are better suited for this type of sword, as many fantasy designs don't lend themselves to be functional in a more practical sense, especially regarding hilts, which can be extremely impractical, but of course attractive in design. This also leads to many manufacturers of display swords assembling these swords with what is known as a rat-tailed tang, or more specifically, a spot-welded threaded bolt that is attached to the base of the stainless steel blade for the hilt to be screwed onto and assembled by the pommel. This is a major deterrent to any functional use of the sword and can be very dangerous if the user is ignorant to this type of assembly. Next would be functional sword types. So what makes a sword functional? The two most important elements are the blade being made of heat-treated high-carbon steel and the tang being full and properly assembled at the hilt. Swords of this type are the most sought after by sword enthusiasts, as they represent a sword as a battle weapon, hence the phrase battle ready being used on many functional production swords to differentiate them from display swords. Functional swords come in a wide variety of designs and level of detail, and like most things, cost reflects the attention to those designs in detail. As far as cost goes, there can be considered a tier of pricing that gives a better focus on this level of detail and what differentiates a cheaper sword compared to a more expensive sword. The first tier would be sub $100 swords. Swords in this tier range from $100 to $50 normally. This tier can be tricky as many vendors sell carbon steel swords at this price point and claim functionality, but much of the assembly and general heat treatment can be very questionable. Usually you find katana in this price range, but there are also many tactical or fantasy swords sold at this price point. They're normally the most basic a sword can get while being considered functional, with cast metal fittings normally of zinc alloy or brass, and a steel grade usually being 1045 or lower. 1045 is considered the lowest carbon steel acceptable for functional swords. These swords can be a good option, though, for those who are on a strict budget or for beginners to get a feel for using a functional sword, but they should not be a guiding factor for what was historically acceptable of a functional sword, nor a standard expectation of what the market offers at higher tiers. Next would be the sub $300 market. This is definitely the most popular tier when sales and enthusiasts are concerned. The sub $300 market has the widest range of swords offered, and prices range from above $150 to around $350. The majority of production sword manufacturers are also featured in this tier of production swords, with a few names being Windlass Steelcrafts, Hanwei Forge, Cold Steel, Dynasty Forge, Musashi Katana, Ronin Katana, Depika, Balor Arms, Ryujin Katana, as well as numerous Chinese direct vendors and forges such as Hawei, Ryan Sword, Jeiku Sino Sword, Hanban, and more. As such, there is a wide variety of reproduction swords to be had in this tier, from Japanese katana to Chinese swords of various type and style, to swords of the Southeast Asia, to Middle Eastern swords, and of course multiple styles and types from various eras of European swords. And then also there is a market of modern military sabers and even modern military dress swords. This is where most enthusiasts get their first idea of what an accurate functional sword is and what to expect from a functional production sword. So much so that a whole video could be created solely on the sub $300 market. This is also the tier where we see fittings and blades get more attention to their crafting and the materials used. Blades are usually made of 1060 high carbon steel in this price range, but there are numerous other steels that have been used, such as 5160, 1075, 1095, T10 tool steel, and more. Overall, the sub $300 market is definitely the epicenter of the production sword market. Next is the sub $600 market. This is one of the more smaller tiers, as not many swords or manufacturers fit into this price tier. This tier's prices are between $350 and $700 and generally consist of Japanese katana reproductions. This is where we normally see reproduction katana take a bigger focus on fit and finish, as well as materials used in the fittings, or as they're known in Japanese, koshire. We also see a similar approach to European swords, such as the Renaissance rapier, the medieval arming sword and longsword, given more detail to their fit and finish as well. Some notable manufacturers in this tier would be Hanwei Forge, Dynasty Forge, Deltin Armory, Dark Sword Armory, and Ronin Katana. This tier is kind of a hard sale sometimes for enthusiasts because they're normally stuck between saving some money and going for something in the sub $300 market, or spending a little more and moving up to the next tier. That tier being the sub $1,000 market. This is definitely the most talked about and sought after tier of production swords. This is where swords get serious with their level of detail, being very historically accurate and having fit and finish to near perfection. The price range for sub $1,000 swords range between $800 and $2,000. Some notable manufacturers of sub $1,000 swords would be Abalon Armorers, Hanwei Forge, Dynasty Forge, Arms and Armor, Valiant Armory, and Citadel Forge. This tier can be difficult for enthusiasts to involve themselves with due to the high costs and long wait times, as many of these swords are made to order. But once you do or are able to, you will be able to appreciate and see the craftsmanship and level of details swords of this tier offer. So, now that we have discussed price tiers, the next thing that should be is what to look for with a production sword and if it is of value to you as a buyer. Obviously, as with most things in the buyer's market, price is subjective. Sometimes you get what you pay for and other times you don't. This is where seller reputation matters, and the experience of knowledgeable buyers can be beneficial to learn from. Buying from a vendor with a good reputation, as well as from a manufacturer with an equally good reputation, is definitely the best way to get the best sword for your money. But there is also something else that needs to be remembered, and that is to keep your expectations in check regarding what price tier you purchase from. If you understand what to expect from a sword at its respective price point, your expectations won't be either too low or too high. A lot of trouble new enthusiasts experience is having too high of expectations at lower price tiers, or having a misunderstanding of what is offered in the higher tiers when they are content with lower tier swords. Or worse, expecting perfection at any price tier, especially at the sub $1,000 tier. This ignorant approach to sword purchasing and ownership can sometimes set enthusiasts up for failure and either make them spread or believe misinformation, or at the worst, lose interest in sword enthusiasm itself. This again is why it's so important to keep expectations in check and research each sword you are interested in purchasing. That way, you know what to expect, as well as find something that best fits you as an enthusiast for what your interest in swords is. For example, if your primary focus is historical accuracy, let's say with European medieval swords, your best bet for the most historically accurate sword is going to be the higher tier price points. With those swords, you're going to get the more accurate finish and details in blade type, hilt design, weight, and balance. Many of these swords, especially those made by Abalon, go to great detail to replicate historical antiques by taking direct measurements and specifications from these actual swords. If you have the same focus but a smaller budget, of course you're going to have to go down in price, but you will definitely need to lower your expectations and understand that with lower price swords, more cuts to fit, finish, and specs is going to affect the overall sword. The question is, can someone be satisfied with a lower tier sword if they have high tier expectations? Now this definitely depends on the person, but honestly, I would say yes. Even though there is a significant gap between the fit and finish and level of detail between the two price tiers, there is still a lot to be enjoyed with lower tier swords. Many are just as durable and functional as most high tier swords, and some even get quite close in regards to balance and weight, making them very usable and functional for long-term practice and cutting. A lot of right things are checked off in the sub $300 tier. For example, solid construction, proper heat treatment, quality steel, and a decent fit and finish. Some novice enthusiasts might even have trouble seeing the difference between a $1,000 sword and a $300 sword. Though once the enthusiast has gained the proper knowledge and experience with swords and sword buying, they will understand the details of what makes a sword quality and what value it holds to them as a potential buyer. Well, I hope you enjoyed this discussion piece on production sword price tiers. Be sure to like and subscribe, as well as look for future discussion pieces right here on Dynamo Sword Channel. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.